On October 15th last year, Donald Trump refused to recertify the Iran nuclear deal signed by 6 countries, declaring that the agreement cannot fulfill the national security interests of the United States.
Phase 2 might be positive and it might be very negative. It might be a total termination. That's a very real possibility.
This Friday, he will make the final call on whether the U.S. will withdraw from the Iran nuclear protocol. Iran has claimed that they are already prepared to deal with the worst outcome. What impact will the U.S. decision have on Iran, and what will be their response? It will have a negative effect on the DPRK if the U.S. walks away from the Iran nuclear deal, indicating that giving up weapons of mass destruction won't end well in dealing with the U.S. What effect could the U.S. decision have on the Korean Peninsula? Trump has walked away from several deals since he's come to power. What message does he send to the world by continuing to engage in policy reversals? And what will those decisions do to the image of the United States?
Last October, U.S. President Donald Trump refused to certify that the Iran nuclear deal was in America's national security interests. By this Friday, Mr. Trump has to make that decision regarding whether to reimpose the U.S. economic sanctions on Iran that were waived when the nuclear deal went into effect. He must also certify whether the deal is working or not. How has the Iran nuclear deal served the interests of each side? What if the U.S. ends its commitment to the deal? And how will Iran respond? To answer these questions and much more, I'm happy to be joined in the studio by Hua Liming, former Chinese ambassador to Iran, and Harvey Zodian, research fellow from the Center for China and Globalization. We should also talk to Mr. Gambar Nadari, columnist from Kayhan International newspaper in Iran. That's our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Zhou Yuan. So let's talk about this deal, a 2015 nuclear deal. It's a multilateral deal that will stop Iran from developing its nuclear capabilities. In return, the world will provide relief of sanctions to Iran. President Donald Trump said that was a bad deal. But bad or not, do you think this deal is upholding? Is everybody withholding their bargain, their part of the bargain?
I think the deal was in the interest of both America, United States and Iran, and even in the interest of the peace of the Middle East and the world peace and non-proliferation. Because without this deal, the nuclear capability of Iran could be developed unlimitedly. So that's a real danger for the Middle East. So, according to the deal, Iran has committed that Iran will limit it or minimize its nuclear capability and reduce its centrifuges to 20,000 centrifuges to several thousand centrifuges. That's suspend its heavy water reactors, which I think is just in interest of both the United States and Iran, and it has diffused a war, probably a war in Middle East. So I think it's in the interest of the United States. But now with the coming into White House of President Trump, he said that this is the worst deal America has ever done. And I quite personally, I don't agree with that because the deal has been observed by the U.S. by 5+1 by the United States and by Iran. It was and it was confirmed by IAEA, which has been monitoring Iranian nuclear activities and capabilities. So it was quite good deal. And for Iran, of course, sanctions have been lifted.
But the problem is every 90 days, the U.S. president has to decide whether to certify this deal or not. And now it's come to the time. Do you think President Trump is now deciding to vote in favor or not?
He hates this agreement, it's obvious.
But last time he did certify.
He didn't certify, but he let the agreement go forward, kicked the can down Pennsylvania Avenue to the Congress, who had 60 days to decertify. Congress did nothing. So he said recently he will not approve this deal again and so on, but he's getting strong pushback from his advisors, especially his military advisors and his military advisors serving as Chief of Staff Defense and so on with the White House. So I believe that he's going to reluctantly allow the agreement to stand for another 3 months. What happens after those 3 months is anybody's guess.
And according to Politico, his security advisor is going to the Congress to discuss some kind of a plan to appease Trump so that he can be satisfied, but also give him some face.
But the problem with that is the Iranians, and I'll be interested in what our Iranian guest has to say, will never change this agreement. This was a very hardly fought over negotiation. It took 2 years to do and almost broke apart at many points during the negotiation. So I think they're not going to get a change in this agreement. So they have to go forward. And the other important issue is that the other partners who signed off on this, the P5+1 other partners, are totally in agreement with the fact that this is being honored by Iran, and there's no question about that.
Let's turn to Mr. Gambar Nadari, a columnist from the Kayhan International newspaper in Iran. So, Mr. Nadari, what do you think of the upcoming President Trump's decision on whether or not to certify that deal, and how will that affect Iranians?
Well, last summer I attended a peace forum in Oslo, Norway, together with our Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif, EU Foreign Policy Chief Federica Mogherini, and of course former U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry. The end of the discussion, the end of the forum, and the conclusion was this: Donald Trump is the president of a powerful country, but when it comes to this particular international agreement, the nuclear deal, he has no power. Meaning, come Friday, he won't be able to derail the nuclear agreement, because this is not a deal between Iran and the United States. This is an international agreement, and all other parties have been faithful and committed to the deal up until now.
But obviously, President Trump is not a big fan of multilateral agreement of any sort.
It doesn't matter. We don't care, because we still have Russia, China, and the EU countries behind us. They are all committed, and they have all made it absolutely clear that they are going to defend this important nuclear agreement for the simple fact that they don't want to see another devastating war in the region, because Europe is going to pay a heavy price for it, just like the way it paid a heavy price for millions of refugees that left the Middle East countries such as Iraq, Syria, and Yemen in order to resettle in the European countries. So at the end of the day, Trump is free to derail the nuclear deal on its own side. He can leave the nuclear deal.
Let's talk about the consequences.
But when it comes to the international community, they are going to help us to stay in the deal.
Let's talk about the consequences of the 2015 deal. It's supposed to lift the sanctions on Iran and help Iran recover from the economic difficulties. Do you think it has worked in that way?
It hasn't, because of the United States. We are still paying a heavy price. Our government is under constant criticism for the simple fact that we haven't been able to garner the benefits of this important agreement, because they promised that if they signed the deal, we would see some kind of trading breakthrough in our global relations with the international community. It didn't happen. We still have no access to the SWIFT system, and we cannot ask international banks to issue us LCs in order to buy things or sell things. So at the end of the day, it is all because of the United States that this important agreement hasn't worked for the time being. But I'm telling you, if America goes ahead, if the Trump White House goes ahead and refuses to certify this agreement on Friday, it will only isolate itself, because Europe doesn't want to have any of this kind of
But do you think the common Iranians
they don't want to have
expected they can have better economy, they can be better employed, and that's why they came to the streets in some provinces in Iran recently to protest?
there are two sides for this coin. One is domestic. The government doesn't have a powerful economic team. They haven't been able to create jobs, let alone boost the production sector. They haven't been able to bring down the unemployment rate or put a cap on runaway prices. That is a simple fact, pure and simple. The government is not up to the mark. We don't argue about that. That's why we saw so many people on the streets complaining about high prices of goods and services. But at the end of the day, the government can always come up with this kind of excuse that it is America that doesn't let us have access to international banks in order to do business with the international community. So we have domestic issues and we have international issues. The domestic issues, we have to blame the government. For the international matters, we have to blame the United States, because the United States doesn't want to see us benefit from this deal.
So if President Trump decided to walk away from the deal, how will Iran react?
I think Iran will stay in this important deal because Europe wants to stay. China and Russia also want to stay in this deal. If they decide to stay, Iran will stay, and it will be a win-win situation for Iran because it will be able to isolate America internationally. Let's not forget the fact that we have already been able to isolate America when it comes to its declaration of Jerusalem al-Quds as the new capital of Israel. America was alone at the UN Security Council and the General Assembly, and the world all came up and ganged up against the Trump administration. They said that he had no say whatsoever with regard to the status of the Jerusalem al-Quds. So it worked in the past, it will work now. If Trump does the inevitable and this silly makes this silly move and walks out of this deal, it will only isolate itself.
Okay.
Iran is going to stay in this
So let's talk about the responses if there is a walking away from the U.S. Away from this deal. Will the Europeans, Chinese, and Russia join with the Iranians to say, we will stick to the bargain?
I believe they will, and I think it's good for those parties, and it makes the United States look bad. I'm not sure that it isolates the United States, but I think they'll try as best they can. It's not that easy, though, because the United States statutes have extraterritorial effect. They go beyond things happening in the United States. And so U.S. could slap sanctions on those European, Chinese, Russian, etc. Entities, although EU itself at least does have some statutes that prevent against enforcement of that. And in all this, I have to agree with Mr. Naderi, though, that in this, the United States is not the prime mover. It's really Israel that's the tail that's wagging the dog. I think if Israel was neutral on this, Trump might have a much different or much more moderate position.
And Ambassador Hua, does this fit into the big picture of Trump's Iran policy? How will Trump deal with Iran? What kind of relationship he's looking at?
I think the President Trump has been very hostile to the Iranian regime. I think that Barack Obama, when he was president, I think that 2013, he announced in the General Assembly of the United Nations, announced that the United States does not have any intention to change the Iranian regime, and the United States recognize the rights of Iran for peaceful using of nuclear powers. But this is the policy of the Barack Obama. Of course, that was the policy of the U.S., but Trump doesn't deny that. Trump said Iran is a terrorist country, and Iran is very hostile to Israel, and he said that the deal was the worst one in the history of the United States. And I think all these things is because of the Jewish lobby in the United States and the very close the alliance between U.S. and Israel. So that's just exactly was the things that Israel wants. Israel has been very unhappy with Barack Obama because of his nuclear deal with Iran.
Ambassador, I disagree with you on one small point. I don't think it's the Jewish lobby, because Trump doesn't need the Jewish lobby. He has direct connections through Jared Kushner with the Israeli leaders, with Netanyahu. So the Jewish lobby may be a cheerleader at this point.
But you think that he's going up to Netanyahu and his policy is because he has direct access to them, not because of the Jewish supporters back home?
Oh, no. I mean, it's Jewish supporters in Israel, in Europe, and America, and around the world. And I think just as he made this unilateral decision without his advisors about Jerusalem being the capital, I also think that he's trying to please Netanyahu, a person he admires.
Yeah, I like Mr. Nadari to weigh in on this. It seems that Trump is getting a closer relationship with Israel and also Saudi Arabia, both both are rivals of Iran in the Mideast. How will that affect your thinking about your positioning in the Mideast?
Well, that's a good question. They are not happy because their terror proxies failed to fail Iraq, Syria, and Yemen. They couldn't regime change these countries, and they all blame Iran. They say that Iran weaponized its allies, it sent them military advisors, machinery, you name it, whatever, arms, everything, logistical support. That is true. We did that because we didn't want to see our neighbors fail. We didn't want to see millions of Iraqis and Syrians stuck at the doors of the European Union countries. We helped them to defeat the terrorist group of ISIS and its affiliates, its Al-Qaeda affiliates, who, by the way, were aided and abetted by Saudi Arabia, Israel, and the United States. They are not happy. They failed. Their regime change campaigns failed, and they have come back with a vengeance. They are not happy to see us to benefit from these newfound victories in these allied countries, and that's why they back the rights
but
in the country.
But if this is the coalition of big powers in the Middle East against Iran, what do you got to do? It seems that you are the isolated party.
We are not isolated. The regimes do not represent their people. We represent our people because this is a democratic country. It is not a perfect democracy. We know that. We have to work on it because of what we saw a couple of days ago, the riots. We have to work on our democracy, but we are the only elected government in the Middle East that elects its president, elects its leader, and elects its government. So at the end of the day, we represent our people. They don't represent their people. They are terrified of our democracy, and they are trying to do everything they can to undermine our democracy.
Thank you, Mr. Nadari. You're watching Dialogue. We're talking about the relationship between U.S. and Iran, and how will the decertification of Trump administration affect the Mideast. Don't go away. We'll be right back. We're talking about the upcoming President Trump's decision whether to certify the 2015 nuclear deal or not. It seems there are some alternatives. He's considering to extend the sanction relief from the original deal, but imposing new sanctions. For example, recently the Trump administration targeted sanctions on Iranian businesses, including Iranian state television, and also some sanctions related to missile test programs. Do you think these sanctions will affect the Mideast in any way, and how will Iranians think about this?
You see, when the Barack Obama's administration struck the deal with Iran over the nuclear issue, some problems remained between U.S. and Iran. Nuclear issue is one of the difficulties between U.S. and Iran. And out of the nuclear issue, there are missiles. There are problems with the Iranian support of Hezbollah in Lebanon. Of course, there are the problem with human rights and democracy. These are problems remain unsettled. And I think the President Trump will continue to raise these questions. He may not withdraw from the nuclear deal, but Donald Trump will raise these questions. First, the missiles, because Iran is one of the strongest power in the Middle East to make missiles, and the U.S. is against. Even President Obama was against it, and the Iranian support of Hezbollah and the Iranians' special contribution to the Yemen war and the Syrian war. So these are all these questions, difficulties between U.S. and Iran. I'm sure the Donald Trump will raise these questions to Iran.
Okay, Mr. Dari, I want your response to this. As we've been talking about, President Trump might slap some new sanctions apart from the 2015 nuclear deal that were based on accusations like you've been testing your missiles, you've been supporting terrorism like Hezbollah. What do you say to that?
Well, if he doesn't go ahead and doesn't impose new sanctions on us, then we should be surprised. We are not surprised to hear him come up with new allegations and sanctions regime on any pretext. He will do that. This is all about fake news, and he's very good at it. He has mastered it. So come Friday, we will definitely see some actions against Iran by the Trump administration. And if we don't, then we should be surprised, because we are talking about two enemies for the past 39 years or so. And they are doing everything against each other in order to undermine their presence and influence in the region. The Trump White House is not an exception, just like the previous administrations. As you know, Iran is against the presence of American military forces in the region. That's why it is paying a heavy price. I mean, Iran supports those who are against Israeli regime and invasion. Iran supports the unelected people of the Middle East. That's why it is paying a heavy price. So tomorrow, it will definitely pay another heavy price for having the right to defend itself and boost its missile defense program, and for having the guts to stand in front of the United States and its allies, which are only doing what the worst regimes in the world do, failing other countries, invading other countries, and making them look like failed states.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dari. It seems the Iranians are prepared for what is up for them. And let's continue to our talks on the grand strategy of Americans' Mideast policy. Trump has recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital. Trump is cutting aids to Pakistan and cozying up to Saudi Arabia. Trump is putting sanctions on Iran. What is the Mideast strategy of Trump?
Well, I think, again, going back to what I said a moment ago, I believe that this is a two-country partnership in concert, Israel and United States. So I think that Trump is buying the viewpoint of the Israelis, and that is to try to neutralize Iran and trying to fight Hezbollah and so on. And I think that Trump is taking bad advice from his advisors. The problem with Trump is that everything is personal. He doesn't read briefing papers. He doesn't listen to advisors because he believes he's the best person to make decisions. He's very friendly with Prime Minister Netanyahu. So basically what Netanyahu says, Trump does. The problem here is, especially for Iran, the Americans have the history of causing regime change in 1953 in Iran. And it looks like that Trump's wish now is to do that again. It will play very well to his base, play very well to the Israelis, and to some extent the Jewish community in America.
Ambassador, a lot of people are comparing what is happening to Iran to what is happening to the DPRK. On one hand, if Trump walks away from the deal and Iran develops nuclear deal like the DPRK did, that is one thing we can look at it. The other thing is that North Korea look at what happened to Iran. America can slap sanctions and walk away from a deal, multilateral deal. Then why should DPRK stick to the way of negotiating?
A very good question. 2 years before, when the nuclear deal of Iran signed in Vienna, many people say that it had set a very good example for DPRK, that nuclear issue could be settled peacefully through negotiations like the Iran nuclear issue. But after 2 years now in Trump's presidency, Trump totally wants to deny that. It damages the U.S. international image. And it shows to the world that the U.S., with the change of the president, with change of the administration, U.S. may not keep its words, keep its commitments, especially commitments, not only Iranian and nuclear issue, United States has withdrawn from TPP, from the climate deal, from many international
NAFTA.
NAFTA. So that's the problem.
But it seems Trump administration doesn't care about credibility any longer because he thinks anything is bilateral.
They don't care about very much in terms of the international community. They are strictly America first, America focused. So they're playing to the American base, and the world be damned, basically. Trump has done a lot of damage, and China's been a major beneficiary of Trump's withdrawal from the international community. I don't think America will ever get back to where they were before, but I do think that Trump is just focused on America, and that's what he's going to do. He's just going to play to his base, and I think it's really unfortunate for the world.
But in the long term, do you think that this kind of a strategy will hurt America's interests globally?
Well, in the long term, I don't see Trump in the White House for much more than another year, if that, one way or another. He has a lot of things that he has to contend with at the moment. But assuming that Trump does stay, I think he's going to continue to do a lot of damage. I think he's going to continue on this course. He's not a multilateralist. Everything is a bilateral deal, and I think that's what he's going to continue doing. Let's say that Trump is replaced by Vice President Mike Pence, who's
well,
a very...
that's a big if.
No, I don't think it's that big. And if he were to be replaced, I would think that Pence would be more of a traditional Republican in terms of international relations, although he'd be very conservative domestically.
So it seems that the other parties, the other 5 parties, including Iran, are more cool-headed about this. They see America is not so consistent with his policy, so they will keep cool, you think, Ambassador Hua, not overreact.
Yes, it's agreements of 7 countries, 5+1 and Iran. So now this time only United States, led by President Trump, said that the U.S. is going to withdraw, but the EU, especially EU, has become strong supporter of this continuation of this deal. And as far as I know, EU has sent their representatives, or sent their people to U.S. Congress to lobby the U.S. congressmen and the senators not to suspend this deal. So I think with the support of the rest of the 5+1, the deal will remain unchangeable.
And also it will deal a blow to the American business interests because Boeing cannot sell airplanes to Iranians like Airbus did.
Yeah, they have a multi-billion-dollar deal that probably won't go through for sure if the United States reneges on the agreement. Another interesting consequence of this is you were talking about the Koreas. So I believe that Trump's action has pulled the 2 Koreas closer together, and basically they would like to, for different reasons obviously, they would like to try to negotiate as much of this between themselves as possible and keep America out. I don't think this is a position that President Trump or administration wants to be in.
Yeah, the currency of American power is declining. That's not a thing that we cannot forget. Thank you very much, Harvey, and thank you, Ambassador Hua. And thank you for watching Dialogue on CGTN. I'm Dylan Beijing. Goodbye.